Hello again, I am Blunty. Now, for those of you out there who've watched more than, say, 2 of my videos, you'll have picked up that I'm a bit of a camera nerd. And I very much enjoy the fact that on a fairly regular basis I get to pick up, play with and review the latest and greatest, most amazing, most budget brutalizing gear out there. Which is always exciting and interesting to see what the latest whiz-bang gear can do and what new features and what new clever trickery they can do, but perhaps not the most practical thing for those of us out there operating on a much more limited and practical budget. So today I'm reviewing a camera which is much more budget friendly for all your YouTubing duties and general videography stuff and travel and whatnot, but without winding up with some cheap piece of crap that you're just never going to be happy with. And it's this little bugger, the Panasonic HC-V100, and it's one of those almost comically small palm-sized cameras that if it came in powder blue you might mistake for a children's toy, but that would be a mistake because this is no toy. No toy indeed, no. This little unassuming bugger will suck in full HD video at a quality that just a couple of years back would have cost you twice the asking price here. But before we get to the performance, a quick stroll around the hardware is in order. The battery on the back will keep you going for well past 2.5 hours of shooting in the real world. The little record button has a nicely solid action and sits under your thumb nicely. A single uncomplicated charging point hovers above the somewhat svelte hand strap, which, thanks to the camera being so light in the first place, is actually more comfortable than it looks. Further on is a manually operated lens protecting shutter thingy. The lens is on the front, which I, in my extensive experience in such matters, find is the best place for it, and below it sit the stereo microphones. Your 2.7-inch view screen swings open, revealing a Spartan simple control layout on its edge and on the body of the camera, where they're also joined by the mini USB port, AV output, and HDMI socket. And on its bum is a snappy flappy door where you jam in the SD memory cards, which you'll need to use because there's no built-in memory, which is fine by me as it keeps the cost down, and honestly removable memory is far more convenient and flexible anyway. And on the highest quality setting you'll get around about an hour of footage for every 8 GB you feed it. It's a very boring design, but boring is good here. Boring means predictable. Boring means easy to use. The menu system is decent, though a bit sluggish to respond, and most options are accompanied by a plain English explanation of what they do to help out the newbies. Video quality was quite a pleasant surprise. It's a nicely detailed, crisp-looking image with good contrast, true-to-life colours and smooth motion. It does record at 50i, and in today's age of internet video, interlaced footage like that is just not ideal, but any decent editor will automatically de-interlace that 50i down to 25p for you, and the advantage of doing this is it helps keep the motion blur suppressed. When it comes to dynamic range, it's not going to blow you out of the water. It prefers to keep the shadow detail and sacrifice the highlights when left to its own devices in its intelligent auto mode, which I found usually does in fact make reasonably intelligent decisions about what settings will work best. But you can also drop quickly into manual mode, which, if I'm honest, is a bit clumsy, but it will absolutely allow you to take the reins with sufficient control to get you around the more difficult shooting conditions, or if you want a different aesthetic to what Intelligent Auto has decided upon. You can fiddle with the aperture, shutter speed, and white balance to get where you need to be. There's also a mode which can help compensate for harsh backlighting. Like here in a little gazebo, I'm in shade but the background is in sun. You switch it on and my face suddenly becomes a lot more easy to see. And it works quite well indoors too when you're filming someone in front of a window for instance, but not so much with the full burning fury of the exposed solar furnace of the sun in frame. There are limits. At its widest angle, the lens will give you a field of view equivalent to a 32mm lens in full frame terms, which is just wide enough for you to be able to do the arm's length self-portrait thing and even have a friend come along. And having that twin set of stereo mics mounted on the front of the camera instead of on the top where they are in quite a lot of camcorders for I don't know why reasons, quite honestly, it's very, very important that these ones work really well because there is no external microphone input. It's simply too small and too low end for that, so it's important that these microphones work really well. Because the problem you usually hit with using the microphones built onto cameras indoors is they're usually omnidirectional, so they pick up sound from all around, which means your audio tends to get a bit echoey because it picks up the reflections from the walls and stuff, and it kind of sounds a bit, yeah. But you can hear for yourself. This one's not too bad. I would still lean on the side of using a separate dedicated microphone and a separate audio recorder just to get really clean audio and sync it up later in your editor and stuff like that. But, you know, if you're on a super tight budget and the camera's all you got, then you're going to get the job done fairly well. I guess this is also a good opportunity to see how well it does in indoor lighting. Right now I've got my video lights on, I've got a big one back there lighting up the background, giving me a nice little soft spot here, and one on my face here to light me up all well. Okay, so this is it with all the lights off. It's actually kind of dark in here at the moment. I've got the curtains drawn and everything, and it's doing okay. I'm getting a bit schmeary here, but let me turn on the regular room light. So here we are. If you're on a super shoestring budget and all you've got to light yourself and your videos is the light on the ceiling like I've got here now, absolutely regular, normal household lighting, you can get away with it fine. I'm not looking too bad. There's no significant motion smearing in the relatively low light. The colours are okay. I'm not too washed out or anything. It's correctly getting the white balance, and it's all A-okay as far as I'm concerned. Back to the lens at the other end of the zoom range. It's the full frame equal of a 1200mm lens, which is, well, I won't say excessive, but it's certainly more than you may expect, and thankfully using the zoom is absolutely silent. Not a hint of whir or hum or mechanical noise will make its way into your audio. And it's when you zoom that you're really going to rely on the built-in optical image stabilization. And even doing max zoom handheld, it copes admirably enough, but you won't want to go without a tripod if you plan on doing this a lot. At a more common and useful wide angle, the optical image stabilization actually does quite a brilliant job at turning the wibbly, jittery one-handed walking shot into a pleasantly smooth and floaty result that is entirely usable. Even some side-to-side weaving, which will often cause some stabilization systems to shudder a bit, can't fool it. So it's a good camera to use to document your drunken evenings then. Or is it? Seeing as though 98% of drunken evenings happen in the evening, when it's quite often dark, we'd better see how well it does without the sun. When it's very, very dark out, you get this. Admittedly, not a lot of detail here, but that can be a good thing. It means the camera isn't pushing the sensor into places where it really shouldn't go, and therefore keeping noise and graininess at reasonable levels. In more reasonable low light condition, it gets better. It's still a little muddy, but the motion is smooth with minimal smearing. There is still noise present, but it's actually surprisingly fine-grained and well controlled. Closer to dawn, and the image still has that grain, and some colour noise starts to bleed in here as well on softer gradients, but the colour and contrast improve quickly from now on in. And once the sun starts creeping back over the horizon, you're good as a golden sunrise again. And in the context of this camera's purpose in life, that is as a casual shooter, not as a tweed-wearing filmmaker's tool, the performance across the more difficult lighting conditions is quite serviceable. The little bugger also has a macro mode, which yields some pretty good results, although it does force the lens into a fixed zoom-in position where it forces you quite some way back from your subject, so while the results are good, getting them can be a bit impractical sometimes. You definitely want a solid surface to lean on or a tripod. But even outside the dedicated macro mode and back in a manually controllable zoom, the autofocus will cope with focusing on small objects quite easily and resolve quite a pleasant amount of detail. And just for the sake of having a comparison point, I tested it out against my iPhone 4S. It's a fairly close call actually, but I think the Panasonic is a bit crisper in the details, and obviously the white balance is far more natural than the iPhone, which always tends to lead on the warmer side of the auto white balance stuff. Panasonic is a far better choice all around though, because you've got all that zoom. It will do stills too, and will even take them while you're recording without interrupting the video. They are only 2.1 megapixels though, so they aren't exactly bursting with detail, but for quick snapshots, or for using as a reference, they'll do okay. Again, just because I had it with me, a few stills comparison with the iPhone. At the end of my week shooting with it, I found I was liking it more than I expected it to. I thought that all my time playing with review units of fancy high-tech $1,000 gear may have spoiled me a bit, pushed my expectations too far beyond a point where I'd find the performance of a few frills option like the little palm-sized Panasonic. But I was wrong. Either I've not been spoiled, or perhaps the HC-V100 is simply much better than I had assumed. Or both. All I know for sure is that it spat out results that I'm happy with. It was easy to use, even if those tiny buttons did feel just a bit fiddly for the great clods of meat I use as human hands. The microphones are good. It has a usefully long battery life. It's very light and small, so easy to carry with you. The build quality feels good, no creaks or squeaks. In fact, my only real non-nitpicky complaint is that it had a habit of blowing out the highlights when left to its own decisions, and that is something that makes me cringe a bit, and pixel peoples will notice some macro blocking in large areas of solid colour thanks to the slightly aggressive video compression, but I honestly don't think those things will be a practical issue of any real concern for the people who buy this camera for the kinds of thing this camera is made for. So there you go, that's the Panasonic HC-V100, a very practical and budget-friendly utilitarian piece of videography equipment. Now on the subject of price, you know the rules here on Blunty's channel. you should Google it, because prices on camera gear like this tends to fluctuate too wildly over time, over geography, over currency, over where you buy it and when you buy it and all that kind of stuff. So just have a quick Google for it to find your best local price, and I think you'll be pleasantly surprised for the dollar per punch performance kind of mathematics that works out being. So thanks for watching. I am Valenti, and I'll catch you next time.